Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive on the ISTJ personality type.
Sounds good.
We've got two great articles here from The Spiritual Seek as our source material. I think this is going to be a really fascinating one to look into. Have you ever, met someone who just seems so organized and, everything has its place and everything's got to be done just so?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Maybe they're an ISTJ.
Could be.
Let's find out more about what makes them tick. So first off, what does ISTJ actually stand for?
Okay, so ISTJ stands for Introverted, Sensing, Thinking, Judging. It's one of the 16 personality types identified by the Myers-Briggs type indicator.
Gotcha. Okay. And the Spiritual Seek, they call ISTJs the duty fulfillers.
Yeah.
Which I think is pretty fitting.
It is. It really encapsulates their core essence.
They're all about responsibility and getting things done.
Exactly.
So how do all those preferences, the introverted, sensing, thinking, judging, how do those all kind of work together to create that duty fulfiller personality?
Well, it's really interesting. Their dominant function is called introverted sensing, and this basically means they're very focused on concrete facts and details. They like to draw on past experiences to understand the present.
So they're they'll learn from history kind of people.
Exactly, yeah. And then their auxiliary function is called extroverted thinking. And that means they apply logic and objective decision-making to the external world.
So it's kind of like they're taking in all this information from their senses in the past, and then they're using logic to make decisions about the here and now.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. They're very practical, very grounded.
Makes sense. And that definitely sounds like a recipe for someone who would be very reliable and you can always count on them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about some of the strengths that the Spiritual Seek highlights for ISTJs.
Sure.
They mention planning as a key one.
Yeah.
They even use the analogy of an architect meticulously designing a building.
Oh, yeah, that's a perfect analogy. ISTJs, they love order, structure. They think about every little detail. And it's not just about, being organized for themselves. It actually benefits everyone around them, too.
Right. So they're not just neat freaks. It's more about creating a predictable and stable environment, which can be really comforting for the people around them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of stability, the articles also talk about responsibility and a realistic perspective and strengths.
Absolutely. ISTJs, they take their commitments seriously. They're always on time. They meet deadlines. They keep their promises. They're not about, pie in the sky ideas. They're about what's actually doable, what's practical.
They're the ones you want on your team when you need to get stuff done.
Definitely.
Now, it's interesting because the Spiritual Seek also points out that their respect for tradition and rules can be both a strength and a challenge.
Yeah, that's a good point. They believe in doing things the right way, following established procedures.
Right.
And this can be great for stability and consistency, but it can also make them a little resistant to change.
Like if you're trying to get them to try a new restaurant.
Exactly, yeah. They might be stuck on their favorite spot.
So it's kind of that double-edged sword thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about strengths, but obviously no personality type is perfect.
Yeah.
What are some of the weaknesses that ISTJs might struggle with?
Well, as we just touched on, sometimes that adherence to rules and procedures can make them a bit stubborn.
Right. Inflexible.
Yeah. They might not always see the need to be adaptable or to try new things.
Gotcha. And the Spiritual Seek also mentioned insensitivity as a potential challenge.
Yeah. So ISTJs are very honest and direct in their communication style.
Which is good, right?
Absolutely. Honesty is important, but sometimes that directness can come across as a little blunt, especially for people who are more sensitive.
Right. So it's not that they're trying to be mean, it's just that they might not always sugarcoat things.
Exactly. And they might not always pick up on those subtle emotional cues either.
Okay. And then another weakness they mentioned is self-blame.
Yeah, so ISTJs have a really strong sense of responsibility.
We talked about that before, yeah.
And that can sometimes lead them to blame themselves when things go wrong, even if it wasn't really their fault.
Oh, so they're kind of hard on themselves.
Yeah, they can be. So learning to have a little self-compassion, recognizing that everyone makes mistakes, that's really important for them.
That makes a lot of sense. So they're really taking that duty fulfiller thing seriously.
They are.
Okay, so now I'm curious to hear about how all of this plays out in relationships.
Okay, yeah.
The Spiritual Seek, they talk about how ISTJs approach friendships, parenting, and romantic relationships.
Mm.
What are some of the common threads there?
Well, across all those different types of relationships, ISTJs really value loyalty, dependability, stability. They might not be the most emotionally expressive, but their actions really speak louder than words.
So they're like the strong, silent type.
In a way, yeah. They show you they care by being there for you, by being reliable, by doing what they say they'll do.
Gotcha. So starting with friendships, the spiritual seek says that ISTJs tend to prefer smaller groups and shared interests.
Yeah, they're not really the life of the party, they're more about deep, meaningful connections with a few close friends.
Quality over quantity.
Exactly.
And what about parenting? How does that ISTJ personality manifest there?
ISTJ parents are all about structure and stability. They set clear rules, clear expectations, and they're really good at instilling a strong work ethic in their kids.
They sound like they'd be good at creating like a consistent routine for their kids.
Oh, absolutely. But one thing they might need to be mindful of is, balancing that structure with emotional warmth.
Yeah.
Making sure their kids know that they're loved and supported, even if they're not always saying it out loud.
So it's not just about the rules. It's about making sure that there's that emotional connection too. Okay. And finally, romantic relationships. The spiritual seek describes ISTJs as being deeply devoted partners.
Yes, they really are. They value loyalty and commitment above all else. They're looking for someone who shares their values, someone who appreciates their practicality.
But again, that difficulty expressing emotions might be a challenge here.
It can be. So learning to communicate their feelings more openly, that's something that can really help ISTJs in romantic relationships.
Gotcha. So understanding their partner's emotional needs and also being able to express their own.
Exactly.
Okay, well, that's a lot of really interesting information about the ISTJ personality. Now, I'm curious, did the spiritual seek mention any examples of famous ISTJs?
They did. They mentioned George Washington and Queen Elizabeth II as examples.
Wow. Okay, so two very different figures, but both known for their sense of duty and their commitment to tradition.
Yeah. And it's a good reminder that, even within a personality type, there's a lot of variation.
Right.
Each person is unique.
Everyone expresses their personality in their own way.
Absolutely.
Well, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on career paths.
Okay.
What are some jobs that might be a good fit for an ISTJ, given their strengths and preferences?
Well, they tend to thrive in careers that offer structure and clarity. So
Yeah.
things like accounting, librarian work, computer programming, those are all good examples.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
They're all about logic, order, and getting things done right.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about what the ISTJ acronym stands for, their strengths, weaknesses, how they are in relationships, and even some potential career paths. But, it's important to remember that these are just general descriptions.
Yeah, it's a starting point.
And every ISTJ is going to be a unique individual.
Absolutely.
So we shouldn't, try to put people in boxes.
No, and definitely not.
It's more about understanding, different personality tendencies.
Exactly. Using it as a tool to better understand ourselves and the people around us.
Yeah. And I think that's a great place to wrap up this part of our deep dive. But I'm sure we'll have even more to discuss in the next part.
I'm sure we will. There's always more to learn. Yeah, there's always a lot to unpack with these personalities. One thing that really stood out to me in those articles from the Spiritual Seek was how much they emphasize this internal sense of duty that ISTJs have. Like, it's really a driving force for them.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not just about blindly following rules, right? It's more about this deep-seated need to do what they believe is right, to fulfill their obligations.
Exactly. And that sense of duty, it really permeates everything they do. It's why they're often seen as the reliable ones, the dependable ones in the workplace, in friendships, in their families.
They're the ones who always show up, always follow through.
Exactly. It's like a core part of their identity.
But even with strengths, we've seen how there could be a flip side. Could that strong sense of duty also be a challenge for them sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. If they're not careful, it can become too rigid. They might have trouble adapting to unexpected situations, or they might take on too much because they feel obligated. They might not delegate or say no enough.
Yeah, that makes sense. So finding that balance is important, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing when that sense of duty is helpful and when it might be leading to burnout or something.
Yeah, exactly. Self-awareness is key for everyone, but especially for ISTJs.
One line from the articles that really resonated with me was, ISTJs are more likely to express their affection through actions rather than words.
Oh, that's such a good one. It really captures their essence. They're not big on, flowery language or grand
They're
gestures.
not all about the I love yous every 5 seconds.
Exactly. But their actions, their consistency, their reliability, that's how they show you they care.
A different kind of love language.
It is. And it can be really powerful for those who understand it.
The articles also talked about how ISTJs might struggle with emotions, both their own and understanding other people's emotions. Why do you think that is?
Well, their primary function is introverted sensing, right? Which makes them very focused on facts and concrete details.
Right.
And emotions, they're messy, they're not always logical. So for someone who thrives on order and structure, emotions can be kind of confusing.
So, like, how can ISTJs work on that? How can they develop their emotional intelligence, so to speak?
Well, first off, just being aware of it is huge. Paying attention to their own emotions, even if they don't totally understand them at first.
And what about understanding other people's emotions?
I think active listening is key there. Really paying attention not just to what someone is saying, but how they're saying it. Noticing their body language, their tone of voice, all those subtle cues.
So it's like being more present in the moment, not just focusing on the facts, but on the whole picture.
Exactly. And that can really help them build stronger, more meaningful relationships.
Well, this has been such a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I'm starting to really understand ISTJs. As we wrap things up here, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is just how valuable it is to understand personality types, both our own and those of the people around us. It can really help us communicate better, have more empathy, build stronger relationships.
It's not about putting people in boxes.
No, definitely not.
It's about appreciating the differences in how we all see the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And using that understanding to connect with each other on a deeper level.
I love that. Well, this has been such a great conversation. I always learn so much from these deep dives. And for our listeners, if you're interested in learning more about the ISTJ personality, definitely check out those articles from the Spiritual Seek.
Yes, they're a great resource.
And, keep exploring, keep learning, keep growing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been really eye-opening, honestly. I feel like I have a much better grasp on what makes ISTJs tick now.
Me too. And I
Um,
think it's so important to have these conversations to shed light on different personality types and really appreciate how each one contributes to the world.
For sure. So as we wrap up our deep dive on the ISTJ personality, what what final thoughts do you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I'd love for everyone listening to just take a moment and think about the ISTJs in their own lives. Like maybe you have a coworker or a friend or family member who you think might be an ISTJ. Think about those quiet ways they show their loyalty, their dependability,
Yeah,
and how understanding their perspective could help you connect with them on a deeper level.
right, because it's not about putting people in boxes or judging them. It's about understanding them better so we can all, work together and appreciate each other more.
Exactly. And, ISTJs, they bring so much to the table. Their practicality, their dedication, their commitment to doing what's right.
Absolutely.
It's something to be admired and appreciated.
It really is. And, even if you're not an ISTJ yourself, learning about different personality types can help you, improve your communication skills, build strong relationships, just navigate the world a little bit better.
Absolutely. It's all about, expanding our understanding of ourselves and others.
Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive, and I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine. I always enjoy these conversations.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us. We hope you learned something new about the ISTJ personality and maybe even about yourselves.
And, keep exploring those different personality types. There's so much to discover.
Absolutely. Until next time.